We have reached the end of an era. This is the last IREM game to have an LED light embedded in it. It was a cool feature, but I guess they decided to save a little bit of money on cart manufacturing. It's the end of an era in another way, too. This is the last Spelunker game for 20 years. After one enormously successful game, and then this sequel that IREM produced themselves, there isn't another one until Spelunker HD in 2009. And that was kind of the start of a Spelunker renaissance. So is this game bad enough that it should kill a franchise? No, not really. No, not really. It's not great, but it was a perfectly reasonable action-adventure game, at least until I reached one part. The story of this game is that the gates to Fairyland have been closed, allowing the dark god Gira to influence the world. You found the clues to open the gates of Fairyland again, so off you go to do that. And the first thing you'll notice when you start a game is that you have to select a character. You have three choices: the Explorer, which is the main character from the original game, an Esper, or a Sage. I wound up playing with the Explorer for most of this, considering I felt like he was the default. But he's actually the worst character. He has the longest health bar, but he lacks special abilities. His biggest advantage is that his ranged attack is a gun, which uses bullets. The ranged attacks for the other two use up their life bar. The Explorer also gets to take additional bombs and food with him. The bombs are similar to the ones in the original Spelunker. Drop them down and back off. The food can fully refill your life, but it's also used to solve a couple puzzles. The big problem for the Explorer is that he has the smallest virtue bar. You get virtue for killing monsters, and lose a virtue for killing natural animals. Those animals can still be a threat to you, or you might want to kill them to get a life recovery item. The other way you lose virtue is by falling in a hole, where you go to hell and you're sent back by Enma at the cost of some of your virtue. If you run out of virtue, it is game over. The Esper's thing is that he's more maneuverable. His ranged attack is a lightning bolt, which does additional damage, and he has a special ability that allows him to mark a location and then teleport back to it. There's a huge amount of backtracking in Spelunker II, so being able to jump back to a previous location is pretty useful. The big thing about the Sage is that his bullets freeze enemies in place. Even if it costs some health, it is amazingly useful. On top of that, he has a special ability called Aura. It's only used in boss rooms, but it does extra high damage to bosses at the cost of a lot of health. Now we can actually start playing, and the game is an action-adventure platformer with some real heavy exploration emphasis. You'll find the path branching off up and down from your regular path. What you're looking for as you explore is a crystal ball. Those are held by the bosses, and they open up the gate at the end of all three stages. And the stages are sprawling. They're large enough that I found even the first stage to be a bit disorientating. As you explore, you'll find a few useful items. The cross is the only thing that can harm undead monsters, and the red bombs freeze enemies in place. You can switch what you're using by pressing select, and that brings up a sub-menu that you use with left and right. When you find silver keys, those are used to open horizontal doors that block your path, and the gold keys are used to open background doors and open up paths that you can go up through. While you're walking around, you'll generally want to stick to your close-range weapon. It actually has a decent reach, so it's fine for most situations. When you're dealing with something a little bit faster, you'll probably want to switch to a ranged attack. That's also true when you're dealing with a more powerful enemy. You'll see a few things carry over from the original Spelunker as you explore, like these geysers of steam. You also take a bit of fall damage if you drop too far, though it's much more generous than it was in Spelunker 1. There's also these pits that open up underneath your feet. On the first stage, you'll encounter this volcano with stones falling from the sky. There's also this wounded deer that you can share some food with, and some tunnels that you have to swim through. The first boss doesn't seem too bad at first. You can freeze the tiger in place and just poke away at it. Then it pulls out the giant face and paws. It looks a bit scary, but the paws aren't that much of a threat. With that out of the way, you can go on to stage 2, and that's where I encountered my big problem. The stage starts out with you jumping between these moving platforms, and I had a bad tendency to jump straight through them. Do that a couple times and it's a game over, and then you find out that there's no continues. Spelunker II is a long game as well. On your first playthrough, you can honestly expect to spend a couple of hours on each stage. And with no continues and no passwords, it can get pretty frustrating, even if you don't jump right through platforms. In Japan, what Spelunker II is remembered for is not being anything like Spelunker 1. Sequels being radically different was not an unusual phenomenon at the time, but for some reason Spelunker 2 became the poster child for that. As for myself, I thought for a while I was going to have to talk about Spelunker 2 being just perfectly middle-of-the-road average. But bad platforming is always a deal-breaker. After that, I don't see myself going back and trying to make any further progress in Spelunker 2.